Have you ever been in a situation where you had to go into the situation blind? You know what I mean by that? Not knowing what to expect. Randall, you were a Marine. How often were you asked to go into a blind situation?
Quite often.
Quite often. Charles, you served in the military. Had to go into situations blind, didn't you? We all have situations in our life in which we have to go into blind, not knowing what to expect, not knowing what's in store, what it's going to cost when we get there. But you know, Jesus doesn't ask us to go into the service of God blind. He doesn't ask us to put ourselves in a situation that we don't know the cost. Matthew chapter 16, verse 24. Jesus said, "If any man will come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me." Jesus simply puts it this way: if you're going to come into the service of God, it's going to cost you everything that you have. Everything. Deny thyself, take up thy cross, and follow me. Three things that he points to here, and I want to bring these three out right now and tell you exactly what we think about these. First of all, he says denial of oneself. Denial of oneself involves saying no to all our worldly desires and pleasures. Denying ourselves says no to anything that we would want. It says giving God first place and doing what God wants first. It's setting our minds toward heaven, toward God. In Colossians chapter 3, and y'all may have to bear with me this morning, I'm breaking in a brand new Bible, and so the pages don't turn as well as my old Bibles, but they do turn. Colossians chapter 3 says it this way: "If ye then be risen with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ sitteth on the right hand of God. Set your affections on things above, not on the things of the earth." We are to set our minds on things of God rather than the things of the earth, rather than our own desires and pleasures. The world teaches us a totally different philosophy, doesn't it? The world presents to us, satisfy self. Do what self wants. Do what makes you happy. Do it your way. You're the one that makes the rules for your life. What's right, what's wrong. Do what you feel. Do what your heart says. The heart is deceitfully wicked. Who can know it? So, deny oneself. Then he says, take up thy cross. Take up thy cross. Well, the cross was something that was very clear in the disciples' mind. In the disciples' mind, the cross was an instrument of death. The cross was something that you accepted death on. There was no turning back when you were put on a cross. There was no coming down alive. The cross was the instrument of death. And it showed death. Well, it showed death of the sin of man. It showed death of our sin nature. It showed death of our natural nature. And when Jesus said, take up thy cross, he's saying, recognize that you've been crucified on a cross. That your flesh nature has been crucified. He's saying, recognize that that cross represents your freedom to serve God. That cross is Christ in you. Colossians, we read, if you've been co-crucified with Christ, if you've been crucified together with Christ, recognize this. Recognize this crucifixion. In Galatians chapter 2 and verse 20, Paul said these words, I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live. Yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life I now live, I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. Recognize the cross. Take up the cross. Accept the cross. Accept what it means. Bear the cross. You have been co-crucified with Christ. And then he says, follow me. Follow me. Now these words came on the heels in Matthew of Jesus talking to his disciples. And he's asked his disciples, who do men say that I am? And Peter responds with, thou art the Son of God. And Jesus said, blessed art thou, Simon. And then he begins teaching his disciples and telling them, I must go to Jerusalem, and I must suffer many things of the elders and of the chief priests, and I must be put to death. And I must rise again. Peter perks up and he says, be it far from you, Lord. Oh, these things cannot happen. You know why Peter said that? Because Peter was counting on the Lord setting up an earthly kingdom. Peter was still thinking that Jesus Christ was going to set up an earthly kingdom that would free them from Roman bondage. Peter was still thinking that Jesus was going to deliver them from such tyranny. He was looking to the things of men. Jesus said, get you behind me, Satan. Brother Samuel brought out in his Sunday school lesson that word adversary That word Satan there means adversary. He saw Peter as adversary. He said, "For you seek the things of men, not the things of God." You're not looking at God's plan, you're looking at men's plans. And Jesus said, if you're going to follow me, you've got to deny oneself. You've got to deny those things of the flesh, the things of men, those thoughts of kingdom here on earth, the thoughts of exaltation, the things of that men are looking at. He said, you got to deny all that. You've got to take up your cross, because I'm going to take up a cross, and I'm going to die. He said, you've got to be willing to take up your cross, and you've got to be willing to follow me. The word follow here is a word which means to follow like a foot soldier or a pupil would a teacher. It was one that came along behind, close behind, and followed closely, not only to learn, but to do as his Lord commanded. It's used over in Matthew in chapter 4 when Jesus called his disciples. Verse 20. It says here, and they straightway, well, let's back up to 18. 18. And Jesus, walking by the Sea of Galilee, saw two disciples, Simon called Peter, and Andrew his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishers. And he said unto them, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. And they straightway left their nets and followed him. Here the word follow. The first word follow, when Jesus said, follow me, Jesus was saying, come close behind. Come follow me. Come walk with me. Come learn of me. The second time it's used here, when it says, and they forsook their nets and followed him, is they accepted the responsibility of learning. They took and they walked with Jesus. They followed close behind, and they wanted, as a foot soldier follows his commander, or as a student follows his teacher. Walk close behind. He goes on to say, and going on from thence he saw other two brethren, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, in a ship with Zebedee, their father, mending their nets, and he called them. And they immediately left the ship and their father and followed him. Followed him. They accepted what Jesus had called them, and they followed him. Now Jesus says here very clearly that discipleship, if you're one that's going to follow Jesus, it's going to cost you. You're not going into this situation blind. You're not going in here not knowing. Jesus has put it all up front. He's uncovered any hidden cost. He's saying, your discipleship, your following me, is going to cost you your life. Your life. That's what discipleship is going to call. Think of all the soldiers who have died on the battlefields, who went into battle defending the United States. How many of them thought that it would require their life? Oh, sure, they heard it could, but how many realized it will cost you your life? I'm telling you up front, Jesus says it's going to cost you your life. It's going to cost you everything, from everything you want in this world, everything you desire in this world, to your very life. And if you look at the disciples, every one of them were martyred for Jesus Christ, save John. John was the only one all these disciples gave their life for Christ. Discipleship's not cheap. Following God is not cheap. It's not something to take lightly. Throughout the scriptures, we find many who have followed God in their lives and have borne the cost that lay before them. Even death they have faced. Today I want to take a few moments and look at just a few who have decided to follow God instead of their own life. Let's start with Abraham. Abraham, chapter 22, Genesis chapter 22, excuse me, not Abraham 22, but Abraham in Genesis chapter 22. Abraham had been called by God to leave his country, his family, and to go out. And eventually he was blessed with a son of old age. He was 100 years old when Isaac was born. But this was the promised son. This was the one that God said that he would bless the world with. This is the one that God said, this seed shall be multiplied upon the face of the earth. This was Abraham's son of his first wife, Sarah. Now, Sarah was well stricken in years when she had Isaac, but Abraham was 100 years old. I want you to keep that in mind. 100-year-old man. Now, 15 to 20 years have passed since the birth of Isaac. Isaac is grown. He's a strong young man. I don't think it was much further along than this. But we come to chapter 22. And God puts Abraham to the test. says he tempts him, but he tests him. Notice it says in chapter 22, it came to pass at that time that Abraham, or it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham and said unto him, Abraham, and he said, Behold, here I am. These are words, here I am, are words of total surrender. Have you ever said, Lord, here I am? It means a total surrender to God. A total surrender to His will, to His purpose, to His work. He says, here I am. He said, take now thy son, thine only son, Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. Oh, wait a minute. God tells Abraham that he is going to bless the world in his seed, Isaac. And now God tells him this young man is to be burnt on an altar of sacrifice. And Abraham does what? Well, verse 3. And Abraham rose up early in the morning, saddled his ass, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac, his son, and clave the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up and went unto the place of which God had told him. Isaac didn't question God, or Abraham didn't question God. Abraham didn't say, wait a minute, God. Abraham, total surrender, totally given to God's will, said in his heart, God said he would do this, and he will do this. I just need to do what God says. I need to do what God wants me to do. So he gets up early in the morning. He doesn't hesitate. He doesn't prolong the situation. He gets up early in the morning and he gets his animals together and he puts the wood for the burnt offering on there, and he takes 2 servants with him, and he takes Isaac, his son, his only son, his only beloved son, and he goes to the place where God has told him to go. Then on the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. Abraham said unto his young men, Abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship and come again to you. He tells his servants, you stay here, you make camp here, you keep the animals here. And he said, I and the lad, I and Isaac, will go forth 115 years old, 120 years old, and he takes this 15 to 20-year-old son with him, and he says, we're going to go to the mountain and we're going to worship. knowing full well that God has told him that he is to sacrifice Isaac on the altar, knowing full well that he is to slay Isaac and burn him for a burnt offering. And Abraham says, I, the lad, going to go worship and come again. He says, if I kill Isaac, God can give me Isaac back. We're coming back. Because God's promise is that he's going to bless the world in the seed of Isaac. Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac, his son. And he took the fire in his hand and a knife, and they went both of them together. And Isaac spake unto Abraham, his father, and said, My father? And he said, Here am I, my son. And he said, Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham said, My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So they went both of them together. I can only imagine the heaviness of Abraham's heart at this point, knowing that he is to sacrifice his own son as the lamb upon that altar, knowing that he is to give his only begotten son whom he loved. See, God called him to a special thing here. God called him to offer his only begotten son. Abraham recognized and followed God in faith, believing. And when it came time, Isaac even submitted to his father. For it says that Abraham bound and made an altar, and he put the wood upon the altar, and he bound Isaac. Now, I don't know, 15 to 20 years old young man strapping and 110-year-old, 115, 20-year-old man trying to tie him. I think Isaac totally submitted to his father. And totally submitted in knowing what his father was doing was right. It's a beautiful story, but it's the story of God and Jesus Christ. For God sent his only begotten Son to die for us. Now God called to Abraham. Before Abraham took the knife and slew Isaac, God stopped him and said, Abraham, Abraham. Abraham said, Here am I. Again, totally surrendered to God. Following God. Told him not to harm Isaac. He turned and he looked, and there was a ram caught in a thicket, and he offered the ram for a burnt offering. And they worshiped God. And they came again unto the serpents, as Isaac had said. He was totally surrendered to the will of God, no matter what the cost would be. No matter what God asked. Most of us, all of us, I would almost venture to say, is too much to ask God. to offer our only child, offer our son to you on a burnt offering. It's too much. But Isaac was submissive. Abraham was obedient. And God repeats the promise. Because Abraham was obedient, God repeated his promise of blessing the world, blessing all men in Isaac. Turn over to Exodus chapter 3. Look at Moses. Oh, I think we all know the story of Moses. How that Moses lived in Egypt for the first 40 years, was raised up in Pharaoh's house to be Pharaoh, but turned away from that life, wanted to deliver his people, committed murder, and then had to flee for his life. And for the next 40 years, he lived in the land of Moriah, where he married. And he lived there till he was 80 years old, and he went to the backside of the wilderness to feed his father-in-law's sheep. And came to this point. To the point where God called him to service. Notice in chapter 3. Now Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the backside of the desert and came to the mountain of God, even to Horeb. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. And Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt. And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here am I. Words of total surrender. Here am I. Here am I, Lord. Here am I. Draw nigh hither. Put off the shoes from off thy feet, for the place wherein thou standest is holy ground. Moreover, he said, I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people, which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters. For I know their sorrows, and I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land unto a good land, and large, unto a land flowing with milk and honey, unto a place of the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel is come unto me, and I have also seen the oppression wherewith the Egyptians oppressed them. God saw the afflictions of his people, and he called Moses. At 80 years old, he called Moses to service. And Moses said, Here am I. Here am I. Moses didn't know what God had in store. Moses didn't know what the next years would cost him. He had a good life in the place where he lived, land of
Yeah.
yeah. In that land, he had a good life. He had a wife. He had sons, and God called him away from that to lead a stiff-necked and rebellious people. A people that would not adhere to what God asked. A people that would not do what God, even after all the miracles and wonders and signs that God did, they would complain and murmur. Well, for the next 40 years, he led that group of people. And he pleaded with God on many occasions. He pleaded with God that he would not destroy them. For many times God said, I'll destroy this nation and make to rise up from you out a new nation. Moses said, no, Lord. Well, because of Moses' sin, Moses didn't get to enter into the promised land. But he did get to see it. He stood on Mount Pisgah, and God showed him the promised land. And then Moses went home to be with the Lord. But Moses didn't know what his life held in store. But yet, he totally surrendered to God's will, to do what God wanted him to do. In Isaiah chapter 6, this was a time in Israel when the temple had been closed, had been locked up, and now King Uzziah has died. And Isaiah finds himself coming to the temple, and he goes into the temple, not expecting to find what he found. But surprisingly enough, he found God in his temple. And he came, and he saw himself. Note the words. Verse 5, then said I, woe is me, for I am a man, I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. My eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Isaiah saw himself as he was, a sinner. And then his lips were purged. And the Lord said these words, also I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send, and whom will go for us? Then said I, here am I. Here am I. Send me. Total surrender to God. Ready to give all to God. recognized his own self as a worthless, a sinner. But yet he was ready to do what God wanted him to do. Just like Moses, I think he feared for his life at this moment, because his eyes had seen the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the Lord of heaven and earth. He said, "Here am I, send me." The Lord tells him, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be hard. He says, you're going to preach, and they're not going to listen. You're going to preach hard and long, and they're not going to listen. They're not going to hear. They're not going to understand. They're not going to see. He says, I don't care how long. They're not going to listen. Then Isaiah says, how long, Lord? Listen to the Lord's response. In verse 11 it says, then said I, Lord, how long? And he answered, until the cities be wasted without inhabitant, and the houses without men, and the land be utterly desolate. Sounds like a long time. It is. He said, I want you to preach until there is nobody to preach to. I want you to preach and continue to preach. But nobody's going to listen. Because I'm going to scatter the people. Isaiah didn't know what it would cost. But he accepted it in total surrender. How about in the New Testament? Let's turn over to the book of Acts. Book of Acts, chapter 9. And I know you're thinking, Paul. Well, yeah, this is Paul's conversion. Paul's on the road to Damascus. He sees the Lord. And he finds out that the Lord is Jesus of Nazareth. And I believe Paul accepted the Lord at that point. Accepted the Lord Jesus Christ. Accepted his sacrifice on the cross of Calvary. Accepted who he was. King of Kings and Lord of Lords. But then Jesus sends him on to Damascus. And he goes to Damascus, and God calls another. He calls a disciple by the name of Ananias. Notice it says, verse 10, there was a certain disciple at Damascus named Ananias, and to him said the Lord in a vision, Ananias. And he said, behold, I am here. I am here. I am here, Lord. And the Lord said unto him, arise and go into the street which is called Straight, and inquire in the house of Judas for one called Saul of Tarsus. For behold, he prayeth, and hath seen in a vision a man named Ananias coming in and putting his hands on him, that he might receive his sight. Then Ananias answered the Lord, I have heard by many of this man how much evil he had done to the saints at Jerusalem. And here he hath authority from the chief priest to bind all that call on thy name. Boy, Ananias answers the Lord, I'm here. I'm ready. I'm ready to serve, Lord. I'm ready to do what you want me to do. The Lord says, I want you to go to Saul of Tarsus. Saul of Tarsus is the chiefest of persecutors. Saul of Tarsus is known in all the known world as being the one person who is persecuting the church the hardest. He is the one who has persecuted the saints at Jerusalem. He is the one that was there when Stephen was stoned to death. He was there. He's wreaked havoc upon your work, Lord. The Lord says this, Go thy way, for he is a chosen vessel unto me, to bear my name before the Gentiles and kings and the children of Israel. For I will show him how great things he must suffer for my name's sake. And Ananias went his way. Ananias went his way. Ananias said, Here am I, Lord. And he knew what it meant to go before the chief persecutor. It meant certain death. It meant that he was facing death. But he said, God, I'll do what you want me to do. I'm not sure about this, but I'm going to trust you, Lord. He comes into Saul, he says, Brother Saul. I love that. Brother Saul. Well, I don't know if he's calling him brother because he was a Jew, a fellow Jew, or whether he was calling him Brother Saul because he was a Christian, brother of Christ. I think the latter. But God told him he's a chosen vessel. And Ananias did what God called him to do. Regardless what it was going to cost him, he was ready to do. Jesus said, if you want to follow me, you must take up your cross. He said, you must deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. Are you ready to follow God? Are you ready to give your all to God? Are you really ready to surrender, to give it all, to say, God, I'm yours to use? To say, I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life I now live, I live by the faith of the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Are you ready to say those words? Are you ready to do what God is calling you to do? He's calling today. He's calling you to service. Every Christian is called to service. Every disciple is called to some service. It may be to mow the church lawn. Brother Charles does that faithfully. We love him for it. It may be to clean the church building. It may be to sacrifice your life for Christ. It may be to preach the gospel. It may be to be a Christian in your life. What is God calling you? And what is your answer? Here am I, Lord. Here am I, Lord. Is that what the Lord hears from you? Here am I. Today, will you say, here am I? Here's the altar. Here's the place where you can come and you can tell Jesus, you can tell God, here am I. Use me. Will you do it today? Let's stand together.